Greetings, Prosperity Spotlight here, Brother Dan Goodwin. Folks, the Bible says in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In the program today, we're going to talk about the gap theory, fact or fiction. I believe you're going to enjoy the program. I believe you're going to be helped today. Don't miss it. All right, Brother Goodwin here, Prosperity Spotlight. Dr. Charles Hiltibidal is with us today, and we're going to have a wonderful show. We're going to have an exciting show. Doc, good to have you today on the show. And we got a couple of your DVDs that we're going to talk about in just a moment.
Yes, sir.
But I'm going to read a verse, and then we're going to get started here. In Isaiah 46, verse 10, I love this passage.
Right.
In fact, I'm going to read starting in verse 8 through 10. Remember this and show yourself as men. Show yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O ye transgressors. Remember the former things of old, it says. In other words, go back and remember something. For I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me. Remember, he said, remember the former things of old, and you'll know who He is, who God is. And then he says in verse 10, declaring the end. He says, for I am God, there's none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. And I'll stop right there. Doc, basically what he's saying is if you want to know the end, go back to the beginning.
Go back to the beginning.
And that's what we're going to do in the show today. I have two of Dr. Hiltibidal's DVDs here. We have The Days of Noah. That's a one disc in there, about an hour long. As in the Days of Noah, it's called. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. We're going to discuss that some, but most of our discussion is going to be on this DVD called The Gap Theory. The Gap Theory. All right, I'm not holding that good. The gap theory. Let me read what it says here. The gap theory, fact or fiction, does our view of the Genesis account of creation affect our understanding of prophecy? And you have a ravine here on the picture. You have in the beginning God created, Genesis 1:1. And then you have a little ravine here between the cliffs, and it says billions of years. And then verse 2 on the other side. Yes. At first, when a guy looks at this, he'll think, oh, you're a gap theory person. But you're not, are you? No,
not hardly.
All right, so explain to the viewers who maybe haven't heard this before. Maybe the people are confused. What do we mean by the gap theory? Why don't you explain
There's
that
a lot of people that hold to a doctrinal thought that there is a gap of time between the first verse and the second verse. Therefore, that gives them legitimacy to, in their minds, to take other portions of the Bible and find a time frame within time to place those events. And I'm confident from both science and from the Bible that there is no gap of time between. There is no gap, period, between the two verses.
Okay. Well, that's where I stand too. I do not believe in the gap theory. I can see some of the arguments that they make from some places in Jeremiah and other places.
And if you take other places and with a preconceived idea of what you think those meant, then you got to find a place somewhere for its origin or its place in the past. So if I can find a separation between these two, then that's where those happened. But neither science nor the Bible verifies any of those things with facts.
Now, you mentioned a preconceived notion. That's like a guy who claims to believe in these, the sons of God, fallen angels, and the Nephilim.
Nephilim.
Maybe they can't find it in the Bible, but they go to the book of Enoch, which is not part of the Bible.
Right.
And they know there's a lot of junk in the book of Enoch. And there is. There's a lot of stuff in the book of Enoch, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that everybody knows is false. Yet they find the certain parts in there that go along with their theory about the Nephilim.
Yes.
Oh, well, yeah, it's right, because the book of Enoch backs us up.
And then they go over and they talk about the word giants and whatnot in chapter 6, and they like to go to the Hebrew. And that's okay, but why don't they like to go to the Hebrew to understand verse 1 and then verse 2? Because if you understand the Hebrew grammar, it's always amazed me, Dan, that they will run to the Hebrew to get something to support them. But then when you show them from the Hebrew grammar that verse 2 ties to verse number 1, that's an irrelevant factor.
Yeah.
It's a pick
In
and
other
choose.
words, if you're going to use the Hebrew, use the Hebrew.
Use it
in
all the
both
way.
Places. Yeah. Now, personally, I don't use it for any of it. I believe and you do too. You believe the King James Bible is and it has it right. But the truth is, if you do know Hebrew and know how to understand some of it, it backs us up.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I discussed that in the, yes.
Okay. Now, I found another verse.
Rex will probably put up a screenshot of what I'm just talking about, the grammar of Hebrew that ties verse 1 and verse 2 together.
Right. So Rex will put that up for the viewers to see and that's in the DVD.
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into it. I do have another verse that backs up in the beginning, but we'll get to that later when we get to talking about that, the very first there in the beginning. But let me ask you this: why is this important? Why did you produce these DVDs? What was the big deal about this?
Because there's such a controversy, the two DVD sets go together. There's such a controversy out there concerning the end times. What does it mean as the days of Noah? To some, it means that there's a return of fallen angelic involvement, whatever terminologies and however they want to perform it, because they really believe that there was a gap of time in between verse 1 and 2. They refer to it as a Luciferian flood, because the Bible talks about, in verse number 2, it talks about the waters. And so they say that somewhere between a prior creation and the one that God recreated in Genesis chapter 1 account, there was a flood called the Luciferian flood, and God destroyed a pre-human race that was under Lucifer's control, and as a result, God had to remake everything, so there's a great gap of time. So in order for help people understand, number one, science doesn't back that. Number two, the Bible doesn't teach that. That's why I spent the time doing this.
So is that what they mean when you see the phrase pre-Adamic?
Yes.
A pre-Adamic world.
Yeah.
In other words, Adam, pre-Adam.
They use that terminology sometimes.
Yeah.
In other words, they believe that, and I cover this. In the first DVD, I cover 7 major premises that they hold to and disprove all of those both from science and from the Bible. But one of them is that there was a pre-Adamic world before Adam, and they were either soulless or whatever, different thoughts go with it, but they were under a Lucifer control. And God destroyed all that, and between that and then verse number 2 is God's recreation of all of it again.
That one didn't come out too well either, huh?
Well, I guess not. I mean, it required a judgment to destroy the first world.
Now, tell me if I'm on the right track here. If I was to take a grandmother out there that's watching, or a 75-year-old, someone that's got grandchildren, if I was to look them in the eye and say, look, I want you to get your grandchildren, get them in the living room, get your Bible out, and I want you to show your grandchildren what he's talking about, this pre-Adamic world. I want you to open your Bible and teach that to your family. Could that be done?
No, couldn't be.
With the Bible?
Not with the Bible.
What would a person have to go to find this information?
You have to go
to crystal ball?
You got to go outside of the Bible. You got to go to outside sources that men have put together. And if you trace it back, it's not too difficult to trace yourself back into history to find when the gap theory became an accepted view among Christianity.
How about if I watch the Star Wars movies Would that help me figure this out?
Well, I don't think so. It might make you a little more confused.
How about I read some sci-fi books?
Yeah.
Would that help me understand that?
Well, it might help
I'm
you.
being funny. I'm being facetious.
It would help
here.
reinforce your idea, I
In other
suppose.
words, they're going out, and I've heard them on TV, and some of the big name prophecy shows. I've heard them, and I've got clips of them. I'm not going to play them here, but we should. But we're not.
No, we're not here to get into a battle with them.
But I've heard they're going to mythology. I mean, they're talking about half human, half man, mythological things from Greece
and even if you study a little of history, you understand all of those supposed Greek gods were actually sons 2 and 3 generations from Noah.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be for another study.
Okay, well, let's go to the next one here. Explain the difference in a young earth and an old earth, because some folks maybe are not familiar with the term young earth.
We use the terminology young earth, I guess as a distinction mainly between those who believe that the earth has been here for billions of years. Now, there are old earth people that believe that the earth is as old, like the evolutionists try to tell you. Many of those hold to the old earth theory because that gives them the ability to have the gap between verse 1 and 2. Young earth is following chapter number 1 in its literal sense, that the earth is only about 6,000 years old.
Okay, so in other
Instead
words,
of billions of years, we're 6,000 years.
well, it's never billions. It's always 1,289,000,000.5 months and 3 days and 2 hours. And I'm not joking. They always come up with some number that's not. It's never an even.
You've got to show your authority here.
Yeah, it's
somewhere.
almost like they got it down to the minute.
But if you'll read their materials or listen close to their teaching, you know what you'll hear? It's supposed that we think that it was. It is always a disclaimer in a word or two that legitimizes their authority. Yeah.
Yeah, because next year they're going to get some new evidence and they're going to change that number a little bit.
It's like the search for the missing link, which is missing because it doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, the link between the monkey and the man. There are no half monkey, half mans walking the earth.
And I could show you documentation. I have pictures of a man actually altering one of the bone structures out of Lucy to prove. I heard him teach how that Lucy was she was about to develop into a human. She was at a water hole and an elephant stepped on her, and that's what crushed her pelvic. That's why it wasn't the proper shape, and we shaved it down so that it was the right shape. I'm not joking. This is what they teach.
Doctor, is there any hidden video of that event taking place where
they didn't hide it? It's wide open.
Where the elephant stepped on? Did anybody video that event?
But this is another one of them. This is what we think happened. We suppose that this happened. It's always with a disclaimer that most people never, ever catch.
Oh, truth is stranger than fiction. It's crazy.
But truth will set you free.
Now, Clarence Larkin, most people have heard of Clarence Larkin.
And he had a lot of great insight and a lot of wonderful
Reference
teaching.
Bible, 1917, I think. Those two men believed in a gap, right?
Yes, they did.
And you had a comment about that.
Well, I'm convinced, especially C.I. Scofield, he was a very honest man. And I am convinced if they had, at that time, if they had the evidences that has been unveiled in the last couple of decades from both archaeological discoveries and scientific discoveries, he would have never subscribed to it. Confident of
Now that leads me to this. I think there's a scenario with the global warming scientists that have all signed off on the global warming. I think it's the same thing here. Isn't there more involved? Isn't there a reason why some of these people who should know better, and maybe they do know better, have signed on to this gap theory thing?
Well, it's like you said, the global warming crowd. The majority of the global warming crowd, when it says 99% of the scientists agree. Well, that's 99% out of the selected 100. That discounts the 700,000 out here. But anyway, but people need to understand that crowd signs off on it because it's an agreement with a crowd that's signing off on their paycheck.
In other words, those 100 scientists work for they get federal dollars.
They work in
in
some research program that's financed by federal dollars.
And if you don't
want to lose your grant.
That's right.
You lose your grant if you don't go along with the narrative.
And they justify it. I'm not saying all of them. Some of them, maybe they really believe this. But the ones that are lying and signing off, they justify it by saying, well, look, if I get thrown out of here,
I can't do this other good research.
The world's going to lose my research, so I'll sign the paper and I'm going to go do my thing.
And so that analogy takes you back to what we're talking about, the gap theory. Because folks don't understand, most of them don't understand, that the gap theory idea developed along at the same time as evolution was being accepted by academia. Up until then, for 1,000 years or even farther back, the clergy was seen on a level as so respected.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, science and academia is going a route of evolution. So the clergy is losing their credibility and clout with the academic crowd. So I'm going to find a way that I can still be accepted by the academic crowd and still hold to my Christian faith. So what they don't realize is a compromise that has brought us to where we are today with great confusion.
Now, is it true also that, for instance, when I was a young Christian, or even maybe 15, 20 years ago, I didn't really have an answer for the dinosaur stuff. I'd see the stuff on TV. I'd seen the bones in the books and all that. Yeah. My feeling was, it's all a lie. Those are made up. There's no such thing. I didn't know.
Sure.
Is it possible that a lot of our guys, because the science was teaching that these things were 1 million years old, and so they said, well, look, I can't fight that. It must be true. How do I put these two together? And so they came up with this thing called theistic evolution. In other words,
God started it and then evolution took it over.
Yeah.
That satisfies both worlds. That's compromise. Let me help you with that. Let me say this. Let's say this is a fossil. And so I say this fossil is 200 million years old. And you say, well, how do you know that this is 200 million years old? And I would say to you, because I found it in this 200 million year old layer of geology. You say, wow, that's smart. Can I ask you another question? How do you know this layer is 200 million years old? Well, that's simple. It's got a 200 million year old fossil in it.
Yeah.
That's evolution and the geologic column in its tying together. This is how they do it. And there's no facts to it whatsoever.
Called madness. It's like I joke with people. I say, I got this rock. It's 100,000 years old. Well, how do you know? I found it next to this bone that's 100,000 years. Same story that you just told.
All the same. Yeah.
And it's kind of
circular
like
circular reasoning with no foundational
sense.
Truth, no facts.
It makes no sense.
All assumption.
They're trying to tell us the world is millions of years old. They know this from carbon dating, which is a scam.
Well, we could deal a whole session, and I can show you the fallacy of that.
Yeah, but so they're telling us the Earth is old. And it's millions of years old. Therefore, there was a gap, and there was something that existed here before. And some of that's going to play out in the end times because these Nephilim are going to sneak back through.
You're going to come back through at the end and all of that.
And they're
because
here now, I guess.
After all, Jesus said in all of it, this, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days coming.
And they falsely claim that the days of Noah were filled with these fallen angels and Nephilim and the whole world.
And I'm not saying that there were no fallen angels involved anywhere, because the fallen angelic force is still at work in our world today.
Yeah, nobody denies that.
No.
What I deny is the impossibility that a fallen angel can mate with a human woman and bear fruit, bear children. I believe that's impossible.
Number one, that would violate God's first principle, the very first principle God ever established on day number 3 of creation.
Which is in the first chapter of the book.
Everything reproduces after its kind.
Right. And I have a brand new book that'll be out in weeks on this subject.
Looking forward to it. Yes.
It's called the the great end time distraction. And that's what this is, a distraction.
It is.
It's drawing us away from the biblical prophecy
Yes.
that our grandfathers understood.
Yes, sir.
And of course, there's a lot of prophecy today that we see that our grandfathers didn't
No,
see.
and the closer you get to them, more light shines on that,
Yeah.
more understanding comes with it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right, where was we here? We've done a little circular
Amen.
discussion
Yeah.
here. Do you believe many were influenced by Darwinism and evolution?
Yes, because when Darwin, who, by the way, was really not the founder of it, his grandfather was already an adamant teacher to him, but Darwin was beginning to develop this supposed theory that evolved into what we call evolution today. It's at the same time as they were, as the clergy were losing their what they thought credibility with the level of academia, that men like Charles Chambers, a theologian that began to develop this idea that then developed in what we call the gap theory, that there really is an old earth. This one is a remake of it, and there was a gap between verse 1 and verse 2.
Now, there is a pretty serious problem here, even if somehow you could justify some of this. Romans 5:12.
Yes, sir.
As by one man sin entered into the world,
Yes.
and death by sin. Therefore death has passed upon all men because all men have sinned.
Yes.
He's talking about Adam, isn't he?
He's talking about Adam.
So if
Made it
there,
very clear.
if there was people before Adam, isn't that a
This is
controversy?
why the adherents of it that are really staunch in these things will try to convince you that these were soulless individuals in the past.
Now, what does that mean?
I don't know.
God created some beings for what?
For what purpose?
Doc, I have a saying that I've said for years about Genesis 6. For years I've said this. I've said, if you're wrong in Genesis 6 about them sons of God, a wrong understanding that leads to problems down the road in the Bible,
Yes.
like Jude and Job, other places, this stuff that we're into, the Nephilim and all
Right.
this. You have a similar thing that you put on the DVD here. You said almost the same thing, but you went back to Genesis 1:1. You want to explain that?
Well, Genesis, of course, chapter 1 through 11 are the most attacked chapters in the Bible. Even in Christendom, they even call it allegorical. But chapter number 1, of course, is a foundation because of the week of creation, establishes time and whatnot. But verse number 1 is truly the foundation of the Bible. And anything that attacks it, anything that is misunderstood out of the first day of creation is going to make a misunderstanding all the way down through time.
So you're saying the same thing, but you backed up to Genesis 1. If we don't get Genesis 1:1 and 1:2 right, then we're gonna miss.
That's right.
We're gonna be all balled
That's
up
right.
later on.
Because if you add a gap in there, well, then you've altered the realm of time that God hasn't altered. You've added into that gap of time things that never happened in a gap because there never was a gap to happen. Yes.
Now, in the beginning, the first three words, in
Yes.
the beginning.
Yes.
You and I both believe that's the beginning of time and space,
Absolutely.
our universe.
Sure.
They're saying the gap happens after that,
Yeah.
between that and verse 2.
In other words, time had already begun,
So
evidently.
they've got millions of years of time with the 7,000 years stuck on the end of it.
Yes.
Which doesn't make a bit of sense to me.
And archaeological discoveries have demonstrated plainly that geologic column of our world today did not develop over millions or billions of years.
You have a slide on the DVD.
Yes.
Can we get Rex to put that up? The slide about that. Is it
Apollo-
a tree that's growing through all those
they're
layers?
called polished straight fossils, and it's a fossil tree with all the different layers of the geology that it has grown through. Well, it didn't grow through those. It existed as those deposits were being laid by the tidal action of the moon on the waters of Noah's flood. That's what all of the geology of our world is a result of. And so here you have supposedly millions of years of sedimentary layers, but yet you got a tree growing all the way through them. Well, how did that tree survive all those millions of years while it was being laid around it? It didn't. It was there before they were laid.
So that find, I guess, did you guys...
Many of them have been found.
So that throws a wrench in all of this. It shows that something existed
True science,
throughout all of those.
With facts, does not validate a long-age Earth nor a gap theory. But they do validate what God has said in His Bible.
Now let's go back to something you just said, because I don't want the viewers to miss this. And I want to read Genesis 1 again in verse 1. But I want you in a second, I want you to talk about the 11 chapters and why those are being attacked. If we have time, but we may get it in the next show. But in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I found another verse that goes with this, Doc, over here in the book of Mark.
Yes.
I believe it's Mark chapter 10. In fact, I just saw this this morning, I think, while your son was preaching. I don't know. My wheels are always turning. Somehow I found this morning. I think it's verse... I'm in the wrong place. Here we go. Yeah, 10:6. Mark 10:6 says this, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female."
Yeah.
From the beginning of creation. Isn't that talking about in the beginning?
Yes.
Of Genesis 1:1? So He didn't make male and female before Genesis 1:1. He made it inside the confines of time and space and all that. And we'll get into that later.
And God explains it in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, explains how He made the woman and the man together. But yes, from the day of creation, not before it.
Yeah. So that in the beginning, we need to make this very clear as well. He's not talking about the beginning of God, the beginning of the universe, or the beginning of eternity.
The beginning of time.
That's right. He's talking about the beginning of our 7,000
time
year period.
Time is the belt that holds creation together. We live in a time, space, matter continuum. Yes.
Right. And so there is no time outside of here. Everybody, I don't know why, Doc, but everybody is trying to put Satan, his creation, inside of the 7 days. It's not there.
It's not there.
He was created. I joke about it. People ask me, when did Satan fall from heaven? I said, yes. No. When did he fall from heaven? Yes. There is no when. It's outside of there's no time out there.
There's no time.
Now, our little pea brains can't grasp this. Now, you grasp it a little more than I do.
He's an eternal being.
There's no time outside of our universe. There's no was, there's no will be. There's real time. Yeah. And speaking of time, Doc.
We're about out.
All right, folks. Well, you've heard it. We're going to come back next week with another session. We got quite a ways, but we got a ways to go. So until then, keep your eyes on them skies.